Hello, all. This is John Lee Dumas of Entrepreneur on Fire. You must be prepared to ignite as you are listening to Franchise Euphoria with Josh Brown.
Passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, and we are back from the long 4th of July weekend, which was absolutely a blast. I hope you had a great time and maybe got to spend time with your family or friends or loved ones, and really enjoy the nice long weekend. I know here in Indiana we had awesome weather. We were down at Lake House and got to do some boating, check out some fireworks, and hang out at the beach with my daughters and wife and family. And so it was just an absolute great weekend, and just excited and kind of re-energized to get back in the groove now. You know, it's funny how sometimes when you get a long weekend, because we're so used to the mundane kind of week to week kind of process, it is kind of refreshing to get a longer weekend in there to just kind of get your groove back. So I am back in the saddle, and really looking forward to this episode. We're going to talk about the 6 things to look for in a franchise disclosure document and why you should care. And I'm going to break that down a little bit further as we get into this segment. But as many of you might have heard at the outset, there was a nice little audio bumper from John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire. So I want to thank John for that great little bumper. John's a friend of mine. I've gotten to know and sort of watch his meteoric rise through his podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. So if you have not heard of John or listened to his podcast, please tune in. He interviews interesting and successful entrepreneurs every single day, and has really a great format and a great podcast. And I thank him for that nice little audio bumper that he provided for me. So in any event, let's get right to it. You know, in dealing with and helping individuals that are looking for good franchise opportunities, I always place great emphasis on the franchise disclosure document, or what people often call the FDD. And it's kind of interesting to me because there's different kinds of buyers out there, or people who place different importance on different things. I mean, there's a number of people who I run across who say, oh, you know, the franchise disclosure document's really not that important. It's all the standard information. There's really nothing you can change in the franchise agreements that are usually included in the franchise disclosure documents. And so what's the point? And that is just really an amazing mindset for me to understand, because, you know, a lot of people look at things as if they're not really that worthwhile if you can't change them, you know, especially when they're looking to go to an attorney to help them. And what I often tell people is, you may or may not be able to change what's included in your franchise agreements, but understanding what's included and really having a full picture and a full breadth of what the franchise has to offer and its history and everything that's included as part of this brand and system that you're buying, that's really the importance of it. And I was recently interviewed on it was a live radio show. It was called ExitCoachRadio.com out of California, and it was a fascinating interview. And but one of the things that I was talking about was how a lot of people who look at buying franchise systems really don't seek professional counsel before they buy. And one of the things that I think a lot of people overlook is that when you buy into a franchise system, the average term is 10 years long. So you can find franchises that you'll buy for 5 years, 10 years, 15, and sometimes 20-year agreements. And it's very, very important, and I always talk about this, very important that you seek professional guidance through attorneys, accountants, insurance people, bankers, and really do your due diligence before you buy, because you're locking yourself into a long-term agreement. If you're just going to start your own business and start it from scratch, that's fantastic. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, if after a year of doing it, you decide you want to do something else, or it may not work for you, then you can just wipe your hands of it and move on. And while it may be a tough decision, it's something where you're not tied into a long-term contract. So everybody out there listening, before you put down your retirement money, before you borrow from your retirement, before you borrow from any other source or use capital that you already have, please be sure that the franchise is a good fit for you. And that ties into exactly what I'm going to be speaking about today, which is 6 things to look for in a franchise disclosure document and why it matters. Now, surely, just as a caveat, there are many more than 6 things you should look for, but these are really 6 key things that I think are really, really important as you're going through the process and trying to figure out if this franchise is going to be a good fit. Well, the first thing is, Item 1 and 2 of the franchise disclosure document tell you the history of the franchise and the experience of the founders. And there's a lot of people who gloss over this section of the franchise disclosure document. And I think it's a really, really important section, because just as important as the kind of business you're buying, you need to know the people who are behind the business. You need to know what the history is of the franchise. Have they changed names several times? Have they had different owners? What is the history? How long have they been around? I mean, there are a number of franchise systems that are brand new. Well, that is really important to know, especially if you think you're buying a proven brand, proven system. Well, if a company hasn't been around for that long, how proven is their actual system, and how often will it be changed? So that's definitely something to consider. I think equally important is the experience of the founders. I mean, you really need to look and see not only what the franchise executives have done in the past, which is certainly important because you want to see some sort of connection to what they're doing in terms of the franchise. But you also want to see what their roles are with the franchise. I've worked with a number of franchise systems where when you look at the experience of the people who run the franchise, you have, let's just say, Bob. You have Bob, who's the CEO, president, vice president, head of training, director of operations, recruitment. And you look and you go, oh my God, this is basically a one-man show. Well, that's really important information to know before you go invest in a system, because what you want to know is, who do I call when something goes wrong, or who do I contact when I have a question? And if Bob is the founder, president, director of operations, recruitment, and sort of jack of all trades, well, that's not a very good system that's in place to help franchisees. And so I think that's a really important thing to know, is not just the history of the franchise, but what the executives do, what their roles are, how big the team is. And you can find out a lot of that information through Item 1 and Item 2. I think the next thing to look for is in Item 3, there's a disclosure as to litigation. I mean, I think it's kind of an obvious thing, but you definitely want to see if there's any recent litigation or ongoing litigation with the franchise. And if you see any that's disclosed, you can look that up on Google or look it up online and try to get the general nature of what's going on. Certainly, it's not a good thing if there's litigation. I will say this: there's a lot of good franchises that do have there's litigation that happens. I mean, as you get bigger and bigger, it's sort of an inevitability that at some point there's going to be some sort of litigious action. But that being said, you really need to take a close look at it, and even have your professional advisor take a look at it to do some research and find out what's going on, because it may be an issue that directly will impact you or could potentially impact you, and you want to know that going in before you pay for the franchise. I think the number 3 thing that you want to look for is contained within items 5, 6, and 7. And these are the initial franchise fee, other fees, and the total investment. So items 5, 6, and 7. I know a lot of times when people are looking at franchises or they talk to me about franchise systems, they focus only on the initial franchise fee, which, let's say they're buying a brick and mortar retail place and they'll say, there's only a franchise fee of $25,000. Well, what's the total fee? I mean, what's the fee if you're buying a brand new store and now you've got to get the build out finished? You've got to go through the trainings and seminars, and you got to travel, and a lot of times you have to pay for employees to go through the trainings. I mean, what is not just the initial fee, but what's the total investment that you're looking at? And it's important to know that, not only so that you understand, okay, this is the amount of money that I'm going to come out of pocket, but from that you can form a basis to now say, okay, how much capital or availability of capital do I need to have to get me through the ramp up period, which in franchising, just like with other businesses, is usually going to be a 6 to 12 month period of time where you need to factor in worst case scenarios and make sure that you have the ability to get cash if you need it. I think the other thing that plays into the franchise fee is you can, from those numbers, figure out how long it's going to take you to break even and surpass what your initial investment is. And I cannot express how important that is in franchising. You have to know before you're starting, at least have a basis of, okay, here's what the initial fee is, and if things go well and we factor this conservatively, here's my break-even point, and here's where I start to make money. And I think going through that process also involves working with an accountant and figuring out your tax structure and all those sorts of things. But I think you definitely want to, from a business perspective, really have a crystal clear idea of, okay, if things go as planned, I'm going to break even at the 11-month mark, or I'm going to break even at the 10-month mark. This is really, really important to figure out. I think the next thing that you want to look for, which is a huge issue in franchising, is your territory, which can be found in item 12 of the franchise disclosure document. And so when you're thinking about a territory, not every franchise has identifiable segmented territories. But the ones that do, it's really, really important that you pay close attention to how the franchise is defining the territory. As an example, I worked with a franchise where individual territories were provided, but there were certain caveats in the franchise agreement and the disclosure documents, which basically said that if you happen to have your franchise on a college campus, any kind of 4-story and above building with 4 walls that was encompassed on a campus was excluded outside of your territory. Well, what that really means and what it meant in sort of fancy language was you could open up your franchise and think that, let's say you have a sub shop or something and you open it up on a college campus, which would be in a lot of situations a nice fit. The franchisor was essentially carving out the possibility for them to go into a building across the street or a dormitory or someplace where they could put in another one of their locations. Well, how is that going to impact what you do? How's that going to impact your sales? I mean, that sort of issue in the legal terms is called is an encroachment issue, which has always been big in franchising, and you see it more and more now, especially with with the retail sector. I mean, you need to know not only how your territory is defined and what the makeup of it is, but where somebody else can come in and how that's going to affect you. I think equally important on the territory side is if you're looking at a franchise that has a heavy internet presence or has the potential where internet can play a role in the delivery of the products, you need to know how that's going to work. I mean, if people can go online and purchase the product as opposed to coming into your store, how is that going to impact your sales? How is that going to impact your profitability? So these are all things that you need to look for within the territory section, item 12 of the franchise disclosure document. I think the next thing you want to really, really pay attention to is item 20 of the document, which provides for outlets and franchisee information. This will give you all the information, usually in like a spreadsheet type format, of all the franchise outlets that they have and company owned outlets that they have, and other pertinent information, number of units and size and all that stuff. And it's really kind of important that you know, okay, who else is part of this system? Where are they located? What's the breakdown of franchisees to company-owned stores? You know, there's a lot of franchise systems where they may have 3 or 4 franchised units and the remaining units are corporate owned. Well, you can get a good insight into the franchisor's strategy and growth strategy by understanding, okay, this is sort of how many franchisees to company owned units they have and what direction are they going, and do you see a trend for, you know, the company doing more company owned stores than franchise stores, and why are they strategizing that way? So there's a lot of really good information that can be found in item 20 with regard to outlets and franchisee information. Last but not least, and certainly, you know, the order doesn't matter in this list of 6 things. These are just 6 things that I think are really, really important in the franchise disclosure document. But number 6 is list of current franchisees. Now, that's usually found in an exhibit, and usually an exhibit C within the franchise disclosure document, which will give you the names and address and locations of the current franchisees. I think this ties into number 5, obviously the outlets and franchisee information, but this is really important because you want to take a look at this and you want to reach out to as many of these people as you possibly can. And if it's geographically feasible, you want to go take them for coffee, take them for lunch, or just bend their ear for an hour and see if you can talk to them about the system, about their experiences, what they like, what they don't like. The reason I think it's important to make the effort to do that in person is because you're just not going to get as good of feedback if you do it over the phone. I mean, when you're sitting there in front of a person and they're telling you about a system, you can have a better idea of if they're BSing you or not based on facial expressions, movements, how they say things. And it's harder for people to BS you in person than it is over the phone. So you also want them to carve out time. You know, as a franchisee owner operator, you're going to be busy. I mean, you're going to be busy running the place, managing employees, all those sorts of things. If you're just having a conversation over the phone, you may not be taking it as seriously. You may be in a rush. And so I think the idea of having a dedicated time to go meet with somebody, if it's geographically feasible, is really, really important. So hopefully these 6 things really, really help you. Obviously, there's other things that are important in the franchise disclosure document, but one thing I wanted to mention that I purposely didn't mention, which may seem odd, but I have a reason for not mentioning it, is item 19, which are the financial performance disclosures or representations by the franchisors. You know, it's funny. A lot of people in the franchise space harp on this. Oh, you've got item 19. That's the most important part of the franchise disclosure document because it tells you about the financial performance of the franchise. Well, yeah, sort of. I don't buy into that. Here's the deal. On financial performance representations in the franchise disclosure document, the franchisor is not required to provide them, A, and B, when they do provide them, they usually are providing sort of an average across a certain segment of stores. So think about it logically. If a franchisor is going to be providing that kind of information, they're typically want to put their best foot forward. So a lot of times it can give you a skewed idea or skewed notion of what you really can hope for, what you really can expect. I mean, getting an average across a certain segment of stores, while it may be helpful to a certain extent, it's really not all that helpful. I mean, you need to look in your area and you need to talk to franchisees, current and former, to get the best picture of that. I would not rely on item 19 financial rep disclosures to give you that information. I think it's a good starting point, and I think it's important from that perspective, but you have to understand what it is telling you and what it is not telling you. And while I think it's important, I think these other 6 items are really, really important, and it serves as a good starting point and a good focus for where you need to focus your efforts as you're looking through the franchise process. The last but not least piece of advice that I would give for this episode is, far too many people I'm finding have already made up their mind and decided, yeah, I'm going with this franchise before they've even had the franchise disclosure document reviewed. And while I'm not in the business of talking anybody out of their decision, I found when people have made up their mind, they've made up their mind. I will caution you to take the time to review these documents before you make up a decision. Try to have an objective mindset when you are having somebody else review this document. Because you may find out certain things that if you do keep that objectivity, you might say, this probably isn't a great deal, or, oh, this is definitely a red flag I want to look into further. I mean, I know when I review franchise disclosure documents, one of the things that I do that I think provides added benefit is I provide questions for you to then take back to the franchisor and say, what about this? What about this? Okay, tell me, you've got, it looks like the history of the company is about 5 years old. It looks like you've got, Bob, Sally, and Joe that basically run the company, and where's your infrastructure? What's that like? So you have to really keep an open mind. If you've already made up your mind, then some of the red flags that you otherwise would not overlook are easier to overlook because mentally you've already put yourself there. Mentally, you can see yourself opening that store, opening that location. So I would just caution you to keep an open mind before you decide on the franchise, and definitely have the franchise disclosure document reviewed before you've made up your mind. Well, hopefully this has been a valuable podcast for you. If you have questions, reactions, concerns, anything like that, reach out to me, Josh at franchiseeuphoria.com. You can also reach me at Josh at franchiselaw.com. And until next time, happy franchising.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.